No respect.
Disrespect.
No, just kidding. Gary's just like that.
Yeah.
So now, before we took a break, we were discussing the fact that the defendant had asked the question, do you know me? And you were talking about a prior interaction with the defendant.
Yes, sir.
Could you tell us yours about when that was?
It was the beginning of February.
Here in Travis County?
Yes, sir, it was.
Was it in the area that in this area, in the Edward sector?
Yes, sir, it was in Edward sector.
In that interaction with him, what was it that caused you to engage in what did y'all have in common that caused you to engage in a conversation with him?
During that incident, I'd found out that he was from Colorado, which I was as well. Not only from Colorado, but we both graduated from Colorado State University. At that point, he had just graduated in like 2010, 2011, and I had done 4 or 5 years before that. And he had lived less than a mile from where I lived in Colorado.
So you had a conversation with him about these coincidences?
Yes, sir.
Concerning where you and him had both lived?
That's correct, sir.
And this is the person who's now in the backseat of your vehicle, correct?
That is correct, sir.
But he apparently recognizes you also from that interaction.
Yes, sir.
And then we're going to resume with the video. now you and Officer Revelo, the two of you are headed to the police department, the APD main.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
When the suspect made that comment about blasting one of you, were you able to hear that comment?
No, sir, I was not.
I'm going to skip ahead. You're our past witness.
Officer Knob, good afternoon.
Afternoon, sir.
I think we met briefly earlier today. We hadn't met before then, is that correct?
Correct, sir.
Okay, my name is Bradley Gutierrez, you might remember. And if we could just, since now we got a little bit better sound, I'd like to just watch maybe about a minute of this, and then I'll ask some questions for you, if that's okay?
Yes, sir.
Now, let's hope I can get this to work, because we've had sort of technical difficulties. Now, if I could direct you to a couple of exhibits that State had introduced earlier. This is State's Exhibit 7. Do you remember when that was taken?
Yes, sir. It was after we had moved out to the furthest part of the parking lot, and that is when EMS came over, and the forensic team was also there taking pictures.
Okay. And so the forensic team took this picture here, not you, right?
Correct, sir.
Okay. And that was taken either contemporaneous to or immediately after EMS had examined him, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Officer Knob, in your duties as a police officer, have you been exposed to or familiar with people who are impaired by drugs or alcohol?
Yes, sir, I have.
Probably part of your normal day, it seems like.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did you notice in this photograph when you were looking the size of his pupils?
No, sir. It was at that time, especially in that part of the parking lot, there was hardly any lighting.
But now you notice that they're quite large.
Yes, sir.
And then if I could direct your attention to this is a photograph of the contents of his money clip or wallet, is that about right?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Now, to be fair, you didn't take apart the money clip and wallet and inventory it, is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
Okay. Do you know if that was done at any time?
I do not know, sir.
Okay, fair enough. But it appears by looking at Exhibit 8 that Mr. Daniel had at least $11 on his person, is that about right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, if I could ask you, with regard to his actions in the back of the car, at some point in the video, he sort of leans over, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And at times he presses his face against the glass, or he's kind of mushed up against the plexiglass, is that right?
That's right, sir.
And then other times he might lay down.
Yes, sir.
And I think at some point he's maybe in a figure 4 kind of in the back of your car as well.
Yes, sir.
All right. And we can see from his, or hear from the speech now that his speech was quite slurred and thick, is that about right?
Yes, sir.
It was, when you watch the video now, is clear to you that he's impaired in some way?
It's clear to me he is on some kind of depressant.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And are you a DRE as well?
No, sir, I'm not.
Oh, I was wondering why you used that word. Seems about right. Okay. Now, you had responded earlier to the state's question that you hadn't seen or actually been able to hear this video until after the time. You couldn't hear what Mr. Daniel was saying back. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay. And just to be certain, you weren't the one that transcribed the text to this video, were you?
No, sir, I was not.
And so the first time you saw this text was when the prosecutor showed it to you?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Officer Knox.
Yes, sir.
Pass the witness.
No question.
Thank you for that.
Yes, Your Honor.
Statement called Brett Bailey, Your Honor. May I approach the court reporter? Will you state your name and spell it for the court reporter, please?
Sure. My name is Brett Bailey, B-R-E-T-T B-A-I-L-E-Y.
And how are you employed?
I'm currently employed with the Austin Police Department as a homicide investigator.
How long have you been with the Austin Police Department?
I was hired in January of 1997.
And other than homicide, what other units have you been assigned to?
When I was hired, went through the academy, of course, and spent about 4 years on patrol in East Austin. I then transferred to the training academy where I had I taught in-service training to existing officers for a short time, and then I transferred over and taught cadets for almost 4 years. I worked in organized crime for about 4 years in a unit called the Career Criminal Unit, and then I promoted to detective and spent about 18 months in the child abuse unit before I transferred to homicide in July of 2010.
And as a detective assigned to homicide, what are your basic roles? What do you do?
Here at the Austin Police Department homicide unit, we investigate all manners of death that are not under the care of a doctor. So we investigate suicides, homicides, accidental deaths, all child deaths, and primarily our job is to determine whether or not criminal offenses have been committed as a result of those deaths.
And in an investigation where it appears that it's at least a potential homicide, let me start off. How many detectives are assigned to the homicide?
We have 12 detectives and 2 sergeants, 2 immediate supervisors.
And if there is an incident that is suspected to be a homicide, how does the unit work? How is that assigned, and who does what?
Our rotation is very complicated, and I'd have to have a diagram board to explain it. But basically, at all times, there is a what we call a number 1 detective who is next up to catch the next homicide. He's going to be the lead investigator on the next homicide. And then there is also an accompanying detective who's referred to as the lead support detective, who is referred to as the number 2. So any homicide, there are typically a minimum of 2 detectives investigating that crime, and then depending on the number of witnesses and the follow-up that needs to be done, then other detectives are often utilized, but there's almost always a minimum of 2.
And, sir, I specifically want to address your attention back to April 6, 2012. At that time, were you assigned to the homicide unit?
Yes, sir, I was.
And was part of your task to help investigate the murder of Jaime Figueroa?
Yes, sir.
And in that structure that you just described, what was your role in that investigation?
This was a little bit of an unusual circumstance. I was not on call that night as the next number 2 investigator, but because of some circumstances, I was actually called at home and asked to respond to the scene. And when I arrived at the scene, I met with my supervisor, Sergeant Hector Revelis, who informed me that I would be assigned the duties as the number 2 lead support detective. So I would be responsible for processing the crime scene.
And that's primarily the first duty of the number 2, is to secure and document the entire crime scene.
That's correct.
And other than yourself, what other staff or what other resources do you have at your disposal to process and document a crime scene?
I have, we have at Austin Police Department, we have a crime scene unit. So oftentimes we'll utilize a crime scene specialist. On all homicides, there is also a crime scene supervisor. I have several other entities available to me as needed, such as fingerprint specialists. I have ballistics specialists. There are a number of different organizations in our forensics unit at the Austin Police Department.
And do all of those resources at a crime scene work directly with you and at your direction?
They all do work at my direction, but I prefer to say we work together. We work with each other.
But if you identify an item as potential evidence, it's not going to be collected without you saying, let's collect that.
That's correct.
And if you say, let's collect it, there's not something they're going to leave at the scene.
That's correct.
And do you remember what time you arrived at the Walmart on April 6, 2012?
I arrived at 5:20 a.m.
And can you describe the scene as you found it at 5:20 a.m. on April 6th?
When I arrived, I parked about 100 yards east of the front of the store, right in the middle. So there's 2 entrances to the Walmart, a south entrance and a north entrance, and I parked pretty much in the middle of those 2. There was a large number of marked patrol units on the scene. There was a Travis County, Austin area EMS ambulance parked in front of the north entrance. There was crime scene tape, yellow crime scene tape up on the outside of the Walmart, and there was a lot of people on the scene outside.
Now, as to the interior scene itself, were there a lot of people in the interior scene?
I would have to say there were probably more on this scene than there is typically, but when I entered the Walmart, I documented, I noted who all was inside the interior crime scene, and all of them had a duty to be there. All of them had a reason to be there.
So there was no one wandering through or anything like that?
No. By the time I got there, Walmart employees and civilians had all been removed from the Walmart.
And so when you say they all had a role to play, you're talking at this point about medical examiner staff, the medical examiner, members of the Austin Police Department.
The transport team with the medical examiner's office, co-detectives of mine, my supervisor. There were a number.
It's not customers or anybody like that?
No, they were all official personnel.
And when a scene is processed, can you just kind of briefly describe how that's done?
Yes. When we arrive on a scene, the number 2 or support detective typically first off gets with the crime scene specialist, and does a walkthrough of the scene, taking photographs, taking initial photographs just as the scene is. The detective and crime scene specialist often identify items that are known right away to be items of evidence. So there's an initial walkthrough. And then things are slowed down a bit, and the detective and specialist go through and identify all the items of evidence that they believe are going to need to be seized. And then those items are marked with numbered tents, numbered markers. And then that whole process is done again. The photographing is done again, and then the videotaping is done again. I think I failed to mention that. There's typically we walk through, we do the photographs, then the scene is shot with video, then we identify all the evidence, put down the tent markers, do photographs again, then video again, and then typically we start to process evidence, forensic evidence.
And that includes collection of the evidence you've already marked.
That's correct.
And that tent number that you refer to stays with that piece of evidence through the collection process.
That's correct.
And that's to guarantee that what you see as item 1 is collected as item 1.
That's correct.
That approach the witness, Your Honor. Sir, I'm showing you what 2 discs. One is marked States Exhibit 16. The other is States Exhibit 17 through 44. Have you had an opportunity to review the contents of both of these discs?
Yes, I have.
And without describing the contents, do they fairly and accurately depict the items as they appeared on April 6, 2012?
Yes, they do.
Excuse me. In the processing of that crime scene at the Walmart?
Yes.
Your Honor, this time the state would move to the States Exhibit 16 and States Exhibit 17 through 44.
No objection, Your Honor.
Permission to publish to the jury? Sir, if you could approach the screen and describe to us what we're seeing in States Exhibit 17.
These are the doors at the north entrance. These are the doors at the north entrance to the Walmart. This is some of the aforementioned yellow crime scene tape. The security measures here are the theft prevention, and Officer Jaime Padron is laying supine there just the other side of that theft prevention.
And this photograph is before any of the evidence is actually marked and labeled at that point?
This is yes, that's correct.
So this would have been your first view into the Walmart when you arrived at the scene?
Actually, when I arrived at the scene, a lot of the evidence had already been tinted. There were 2 detectives on the scene prior to my arrival who had assisted with some of the identification of the evidence, and so a lot of the evidence had already been tinted by the time I arrived. But this would have been the initial view for the first detectives and the first crime scene specialist who arrived.
And in States Exhibit 18, is that kind of what you were describing as a lot more people in the crime scene than you're used to?
That's correct.
And those little yellow things on the floor, are those the tent markers that you're referring to?
Yes.
And so each of them has a number and is identifying a specific piece of potential evidence?
That's correct.
And at that point, you don't know if it's evidence or not, is that correct? You're just collecting anything that could turn out to be evidence?
Correct.
And in this photograph, it's depicting tent numbers 1 and 2. What are tent numbers 1 and 2?
Tent number 1 identifies Jaime, Officer Jaime Padron, and tent number 2 identifies a spent shell case that is laying right beside his head.
The left side of his head?
Yes.
And now, the stuff on his chest and abdomen, is that from the medical personnel?
That's what I would refer to as EMS paraphernalia, medical.
And is it common for them to leave it attached when they leave?
Yes, it is.
Specifically, is tent number 2, is that the case you're referring to?
The spent case is here.
And tent number 3,
This is another spent case that is just south and west of Jaime.
when you describe something as a spent case, what does that mean?
It's been fired, so the projectile, which would normally be at this end of the case, has been projected out the end of a firearm.
And if hypothetically someone's firing a semi-automatic weapon, what happens to the shell casing when that weapon is fired?
If everything works properly, the spent case is ejected from the firearm.
There's a port on the firearm and it's ejected automatically?
That's correct.
That's tent number 4, State's Exhibit 22.
That is a shoe that was specifically identified and collected.
And if I could zoom in up there at the top of that, what is that right there?
That is, I would call it a threshold. I don't know another word, but that's just where the floor changes from tile to wood. It's just a threshold, I guess.
So it's a transition of floor surfaces.
That's correct.
And what is depicted in State's Exhibit 23, tent number 5?
So this is a live cartridge that was found just south and east of, actually a fairly good distance south and east of Jaime. You can tell this one's live. This is the projectile I was referring to earlier. So this projectile, this cartridge is intact, has not been fired.
And just from your observations, can you make any determination of what kind of round that is, or did you later make some determination of what kind of round it is?
I wouldn't be able to tell you from that photograph, but I did determine what type of ammunition it was.
When it was collected?
Yes, that's correct.
And what type of ammunition was it?
380.
And any specific type of 380 ammunition?
I don't recall. I remember identifying the caliber, which is 380, but I don't recall if there was a make on the case.
Were you able to determine if it was a hollow point or a?
It was a hollow point.
What does a hollow point mean?
A hollow point is just, for example, in layman's terms, is going to mushroom or close down and kind of spread out, whereas the opposite of that, a lead ball ammo type, is going to stay more intact and not typically be as deformed upon impact of something. So hollow points spread out and typically cause more damage.
And that's kind of how they're branded or marketed, is that correct?
That's correct.
Tent number 6 in State's Exhibit 24.
Tent number 6 is a Jimenez Model J380 firearm that was found. So Jaime is here on the floor, so this is just east of where Jaime was laying.
And would this weapon be capable of discharging the casings and the live round that we've seen earlier?
Yes.
And as to these other items that are present in that photograph, what are those?
EMS paraphernalia.
More packaging from items they use?
That's correct.
And is that a close-up of that same weapon?
Yes, that's the Jimenez Arms 380.
And that's still in its location there on the floor of the Walmart?
That's prior to moving it, yes.
And up in the, I don't know what part of the gun you would describe that as, what is that?
Well, this is the rear of the slide, and are you referring to this?
Yes, sir.
I believe that's apparent blood.
And you don't have any testing or anything of that nature, it appeared to be consistent with blood?
That's correct. We have the ability on a scene to test substances for the presence of iron to determine whether or not it's blood. But in this case, we were going to be seizing the firearm, so I didn't have that particular stain tested on the scene, but I recognized it as being consistent with blood.
And then are those your hands in State's Exhibit 26?
Yes, they are.
And what are you doing in State's Exhibit 26?
I have picked the gun up for collection, and I am making it safe for transport to the laboratory. So the first thing I did when I picked this firearm up is I released the magazine and removed it from the grip of the gun.
So when it was on the floor and tinted as number 6, it still had the magazine in the grip of the weapon?
The magazine was seated fully in the firearm when it was on the floor. That's correct.
And State's Exhibit 27?
This is a rear view of the magazine after it's removed, showing the back of the live cartridge that was in the magazine.
And was that a 380 round as well?
It was.
And State's Exhibit 28?
Front view of the magazine, showing the hollow point projectile in the 380 round. And you can see from this photograph that the follower here is visible, meaning that's the only projectile or the only cartridge in that magazine. There's only one.
Again, are those still your hands in State's Exhibit 29?
Yes, they are.
And what are you doing in this part of the process?
At this point, I've removed the magazine and I have manipulated the slide of the gun. So there's a slide on top of the gun, and I pulled it back just a little bit to expose a live cartridge that was in the chamber of the gun.
And is that the cartridge in State's Exhibit 30?
After getting a picture of it in the gun, I then went ahead and pulled the slide back as far as it would go, and the projectile, the cartridge fell out into my hand. Yes, that's the cartridge that came out of the gun.
And so when you initially picked up that weapon from the floor of the Walmart, it was capable of firing 2 rounds in the condition it was laying there?
That's correct.
The one in the magazine and the one in the chamber?
That's correct.
And then tent number 7?
Tent number 7 is another spent case that was found considerably to the east of where Jaime was laying, across one of those thresholds, another beyond the theft prevention device.
So past where the gun was located?
Yes.
And tent numbers 8 and 9?
8 and 9 are both buttons, black buttons.
Did they appear to you to be consistent with a duty shirt for an Austin police officer?
They do. In fact, duty shirts almost always have only 2 buttons that are operational. The middle buttons are all sewn to look like they're real buttons, but they're just sewn onto the shirt. So just the top button and the bottom button are the 2 that you actually only physically button.
And in State's Exhibit 34?
This is a handy talkie, if you will, that was identified as belonging to the Walmart. So this was property of the Walmart, just a radio, handheld radio.
Item tent number 11?
Tent number 11 was identified as Dreyer's Ice Cream, and that's it, ice cream.
And what is marked by tent number 12?
Number 12 is an actual projectile. So this is the hollow point projectile that came out of the case, and it was discovered laying in a fairly tall stack of styrofoam ice chests, and it was just laying there.
In that condition?
That's exactly how it was found. That's correct.
And were these ice chests situated where you could see in them if you were just standing next to them?
We were fortunate in that they were a little bit taller than I would have been able to see, but one of the other detectives on the scene was Detective Jason Cummins, who is about 6'5", and he was standing near this stack of styrofoam ice chests and happened to look over in them and just saw it. So I actually had to see it. I actually had to stand on my tippy toes just a little bit.
In State's Exhibit 37, is that just a close-up of that same thing?
That's correct.
And can you describe this element here, what that is?
Yeah, I would refer to it as mushrooming. This is the displacement of the projectile that I was referring to, how it kind of fans out and typically causes more destruction. A ball projectile typically it could be deformed, but it typically would not widen upon impact.
And from an examination of this, can you make any other observations as to that item?
I recognize things on that projectile that are consistent with human tissue and blood.
And is that what I would describe as the stringy things
Yes.
through here?
Yes.
And then, again, what is that?
That's the same projectile. It's been flipped over. So we were looking at the back of the projectile to begin with, and this would be the front of the projectile.
And again, that area in the center is what you're describing is characteristic of a hollow point round?
That's correct.
And what is tent number 13?
I was made aware of, after I'd been on the scene for a little while, Detective Sandra Benningfield came and made me aware that a Walmart employee had used a shirt to wipe his hands after helping perform life-saving measures, and he had discarded that shirt in a trash can at this location. So that is depicting the location of a shirt that was believed to have forensic evidence on it.
And that's far more to the center of the store.
That is correct.
And if William Garlow testified that he used his shirt in part of the first aid process and threw it in a trash can, that's what we're seeing here.
That's the only shirt that I found in a trash can. That's correct.
And then this is just that same item out of the bag.
Yes.
And tent number is not very visible, but what's marked by tent number 14?
Tent number 14 is actually what is referred to as a defect in the metal ceiling of the Walmart above checkout register number 2.
And on the other side of that metal, what is there?
Well, there is some empty space between the ceiling and then the roof, and then beyond the roof is sky. You know, it's.
And did y'all make an effort to find the round that caused that defect?
Detective White and I believe Detective Revelis, or Sergeant Revelis, and one of the crime scene specialists went up onto the roof and actually found the location that would be consistent with this projectile exiting the roof.
They found another hole,
That's correct.
but never a projectile.
They did not recover that projectile.
And then tent number 15.
Tent number 15 is another defect. This is the ceiling tile or ceiling just to the south of Jaime, and the stack of styrofoam cups. It's actually more. I think I described it in my report as being above a cooler that was holding bags of ice, and so that is another defect believed to be caused by a projectile.
And can you make any conclusions as to the shape of the defect, if anything that could have been happening?
I can tell you from my limited knowledge, my training and experience, that projectile was tumbling. It was not, when a projectile comes out of the barrel of a gun, it's typically spinning from a firearm that has rifling, and it's spinning so it goes through the air very efficiently. And once it strikes something, it starts to tumble, and therefore when that happens, you would get an abnormal looking, not round, but an abnormal looking defect, which is what I'm seeing here.
And as to State's Exhibit 43, what is State's Exhibit 43?
I recognize this as a diagram of the scene at the Walmart, depicting vehicles outside, the vehicle that Jaime was driving, and the evidence that was tinted, that was marked inside the Walmart there on the diagram.
So if we go to the interior of the store, those numbers on the diagram correspond to where each specific item was located within the store?
That's correct.
And State's Exhibit 44, what is depicted in that photograph?
This is a clump of a few items that were removed from Jaime's right breast pocket of his uniform shirt. I recognize this blue card here is a Miranda card. There is some money, cash money here. There's a card that has contact phone numbers on it. It's just some stuff that Jaime kept in his shirt pocket.
And specifically as to that region right here across the middle, did you make any conclusions or observations as to that?
I recognize that as being consistent with defects being damaged by a projectile.
And did you have an opportunity to inspect his Officer Padron's duty shirt?
Yes.
And was there a defect on his duty shirt consistent with the defect that would appear in these contents of a pocket?
There was a defect in the shirt pocket that went in to the shirt pocket and then exited underneath the arm at a much more oblique angle than the entrance.
And was Officer Padron at the time wearing a vest?
He was.
And was there other evidence at the scene consistent with one of the rounds going through his pocket and striking this paper?
Yeah, one of the things that I noted when I first got to the scene was little pieces of paper scattered all over the floor to the south of Officer Padron, almost like confetti looking. And when Dr. Dolanak, the chief pathologist, opened Officer Padron's shirt, there was the same confetti consistent with what I saw on the floor, and I believe both of those things were a result of this damage to these items in his shirt pocket.
Now, was there any evidence of an entry wound on Officer Padron's person to correspond to this?
No, there was not.
You can have a seat. You have permission to publish State's Exhibit 16. The detective, right there on that, what I would call the threshold of the doors themselves, what did that stain appear to you to be?
That stain appears to be consistent with blood.
And did you at some point go back and review the surveillance video of the Walmart?
I reviewed portions of it.
And were you able to conclude what you determined to be the likely source of that?
I don't know that it would be fair to say that I was able to determine that. I know that when I arrived on scene, I was meeting with Detective Renee Fox, who had been on scene since about 3 a.m., and she told me that...
I have to object to any kind of hearsay statement.
So you personally didn't make any conclusions as to that? You just...
Yes, I personally did make a conclusion after I was... Yes, I did make a conclusion.
Was it based on information you gathered or just information you were told?
Based on information I was told.
So that casing that's identified right there, I believe that's the one you earlier described as being quite some distance from everything else.
That's correct.
Can you make any conclusions from the disparity or the distance apart of the casings as to the position of the gun when it was fired?
No, I can't.
And why not?
Well, when a case is discharged from a firearm, it doesn't always go in the same direction. It doesn't always go the same distance. Additionally, with the number of first responders, EMS, firefighters, officers that were on this scene, I don't know whether this was the original resting place for this case.
And would obstruction of the port on the gun play a role as well?
It could, certainly.
If you're in close proximity to somebody on the typically a right side of a semi-automatic, that it could impair the ejection
Distance.
Is that
Yes,
correct?
absolutely.
Whereas if it's unobstructed, it's going to go much further.
That's correct.
And in your training and experience on a floor, a tile floor, how far can these things roll?
I would be hesitant to put a number on it, but a good distance.
And Detective, I can stop right there. What is the camera focusing in on this point?
That is Jaime's holster and duty weapon.
And what security devices does that holster have to ensure that someone else doesn't pull his gun out of his holster?
It actually has two devices. The first is a hood, the leather strap that goes over the back of the slide. That has to actually be engaged by the thumb and pushed forward so the firearm can come out. And then there's also an internal safety that has to be engaged by the thumb inside the between the hip and the inside of the firearm. It has to be pushed down and back for the firearm to be able to come out of the holster.
And if both of those things are not done correctly, the weapon cannot be removed.
That's correct.
And can you see the weapon in the holster in that photograph?
I can make out the rear sight and the back of the slide and can see that it's in the holster.
Sir, is that defect there in the roof the one that you described as tumbling?
That's correct.
And was the stack of ice chest that they scrolled over to get there, the stack of ice chest in which you found tent number 12?
Yes.
And Detective, the remainder of this video is blank. Do you know why that is?
Yeah, I'm aware of that happening before when our multimedia lab transfers the digital recording that was taken by the camera at the scene onto disk. They start the digital recording playing and the disc recording, and then they go and do other work, and they let it record. So it recorded blank space for the rest of the hour.
So even though there's 40 minutes left on that video, there's nothing else on that video?
That's correct.
Do you have any questions with this?
Yes.
If I could have you look at States Exhibits 45 through 55. Do you recognize those to be the items that were collected by crime scene specialist Joseph Morales at your direction from the Walmart at 12900 North I-35 on April 6, 2012?
Yes, sir, I do.
And do the bags and the numbering on those items correspond to the item numbers you assigned to the items in the store? For instance, JMM2 is the same as tent number 2 and all the things we've seen.
That's correct.
Can I just cut and state we move to the States Exhibits 45 through 55? With no objection, right? Yes, sir. If you would mind stepping down, publish these if you would, jury. Beginning with States Exhibit 45, without opening that package, can you remove it from the box and tell us what States Exhibit 45 is?
This is JMM2. This is the spent case that was recovered from right beside Jaime's head, just to the left of his head.
And if you could look over your right shoulder, that's what's depicted in States Exhibit 20.
That's correct.
And States Exhibit 46.
Can I set these here?
Yes, that's fine.
JMM3 is the spent case that was discovered to the south and west of Jamie. That's correct in the photograph.
And States Exhibit 47.
JMM4 is the shoe that was collected to the west of where Jaime was positioned.
States Exhibit 48.
JMM5 is the live cartridge that was found to the east across that threshold, or across that transition piece closer to the door's entrance.
States Exhibit 49. The next one.
This is the Jimenez 380 firearm. The magazine that was removed from it, and both live cartridges that were in the firearm.
And you and I, or you opened that in my presence last week, is that correct?
That's correct.
And that crime scene table on the bottom, is that yours?
Yes, it is.
And does it bear your initials?
There's my initials and my employee number and the date.
And when evidence is seized and then later opened, is that traditionally how it's repackaged?
Yes.
And what is the purpose of it?
It's to show, well, obviously it was sealed here at the top when it was first sealed. And then I opened it at the bottom to just so that we don't damage this up here. And when I took these items out of this bag just to look to see what all was in this bag, when I put it back, I sealed it up where I cut the bag open to just ensure the integrity of this evidence.
And so in that bag, you confirm that that's not only the .380 Jimenez Arms pistol, but the magazine and the 2 rounds that were contained within it when you seized it.
That's correct.
And it states Exhibit 50.
JMM7, which is the cartridge case that was spent, that was found considerably to the east of where Hyman was going.
How many exhibit is that? I'm sorry.
This is 51.
And so what are 51 and 52?
The buttons that were on the photo.
Those were labeled 8 and 9?
8 and 9, that's correct. States Exhibit 53 is marked JMM10, and this is the radio that belonged to Walmart. States Exhibit 54 is JMM12, and it's the projectile that was recovered from inside the styrofoam cooler stack.
And finally, State Exhibit 55.
JMM13, which is the shirt that was recovered from the trash can at Register 23.
Thank you. I'll pass the witness this time.
Before the cross, we're going to take our lunch break. I would ask us to be back at 2:15.
My cross may be just a couple of minutes long.
A couple of minutes?
It's a very brief cross.
Okay.
So if you want to do that before you
If we're coming a couple of minutes, we can do that now.
Mr. Bailey, I'm Russ Hunt. Like I said, I just have very few questions for you. On the video, it shows that whoever, did you take the video first of all?
No, the video was taken by crime scene supervisor Vince Gonzalez.
Okay, so Gonzalez takes the video from the parking lot and he closes up on the motorcycle that was parked next to the flagpole.
That's correct.
And that was Mr. Daniels' motorcycle. You understand that, don't you?
Yes, sir.
Are you a little familiar with motorcycles and how they operate and some of the equipment on the motorcycles?
Very little. I've never ridden a motorcycle, but I know a little bit about them.
On the back of the motorcycle was a motorcycle helmet. You remember seeing that?
Yes.
And you're aware that typically there is a lock where you can, a motorcycle operator can lock their motorcycle helmet when they're not using the motorcycle. Are you aware of that?
That makes sense. I believe I've heard of that before. I don't know how common it is.
Okay. And do you know whether it's the ignition keys on the motorcycle that would unlock that lock on the back of the motorcycle?
I wouldn't have any idea.
Fair enough. Your Honor, we'll pass the witness.
All right.
No vote.
Thank you. You may sit down. We will still recess for lunch. We'll see you later. should be, yeah.